Hello, Luca. Thank you so much for being here on my channel.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So you're a polyglot. Why don't you tell everyone, how many languages do you speak?
So when people ask me how many languages I speak, I always reply that I've been learning 15 languages and I am functional in 10 or 11, meaning that if you ask me at the drop of a hat to have a conversation with you right now, I would be able to hold a conversation and more in 10 to 11 languages. But I've been learning 15 in my language learning career, so to speak.
Well, I know a lot of people on my channel struggle with learning one language, so that's an amazing accomplishment. Now, just so everyone knows, English is not your native language. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. My native language is Italian. I was born and raised in Italy.
Okay. Can you quickly summarize your experience with learning English as a second language?
Sure. So first, doom and gloom and desperation at school. I started learning English when I was 10 in middle school. And then at the ripe age of 12, my teachers decided to hire an American tutor, Susan from Chicago. And that changed everything because until then, I could not even pronounce the word enough. I used to say inaug because Italians are notoriously like we tend to read exactly in Italian, you speak as you write. So, but in English, which is it's not a phonetic language, it's completely different. And then she changed everything because I moved from having to do homework for school and with a relatively, let's say, unpleasant English teacher to watching movies, having interesting and meaningful conversations with Susan, who used to record, movies for me back in the day. We didn't have the internet. And I started having fun. I started realizing that I could learn English by myself, and all those limiting beliefs that I had, both self-imposed and imposed by society, then just melted like snow. And that's the moment where everything changed at 12. And then, I started learning more and more by myself, starting reading books, starting watching more and more, movies. And then I went abroad to Ireland for the first time. And I remember that people call me the American in the neighborhood. And I was very proud of that because just 3 years prior, I could not even string a sentence together. And then in the course of the last, I would say over the last 20, 30 years, I've been using English a lot with my friends. And, I've been living with the English language. I've been learning English and using English a lot. So now I think I speak it decently.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure all my students would agree. And so for you, it seems like the moment that things change is when you went from a language learning approach that you didn't enjoy to one that you did enjoy. Is that how you apply the same approach to learning your other languages?
Yeah, let's put it this way, that the shift was both in terms of techniques, but mostly in terms of mindset, because I suddenly realized that I could actually learn English. Now, one thing that really happens with most students who've never learned another foreign language successfully is that they don't actually believe that they can do it. And this reminds me of the time when at the ripe age of 7, I was on the seat of a bike and I tried to ride the bike for the first time. And I remember the frustration. I ended up in tears that day, and my father telling me, just be patient and you will learn how to ride the bike. Then when that magically happened after a few days of trying, I started believing that I could actually ride a bike, and then I started riding a bike. Same thing happens when we acquire a skill like learning a language. Until you've reached fluency in a language, there's always this nagging thought that maybe you're not good enough, that maybe you were not bitten by the polyglot bug or blessed by the gods, the language gods, and you don't have talent. But the reality is that every single person on this planet can learn a foreign language, any foreign language for that matter, if they already speak their own native language fluently. The problem is that, unfortunately, within the education system is we have it backwards, unfortunately. So people tend to learn in a very inefficient way, and they come to the conclusion that it's their fault, that they're not good enough. How many times do we have these limiting beliefs? So I think that what really changed for me was the fact that I started believing, like Susan brought about this revolution. In terms of techniques, yes, that was important also to discover, the joy of learning. But I think the real shift was psychological more than technical, so to speak. But then, the combination of the psychological change and the adopting techniques and strategies and activities that I really liked, this combination worked wonders for me. That's the real difference, game changer, as they say.
I'm happy you mentioned that because I do receive a lot of comments, emails from students, and they're just frustrated. They say, Jennifer, I've been learning English for 10 years, 15 years. I've been living in North America for 25 years and I'm still struggling with my English. And I can tell there's a lot of frustration in those messages I get. So how can these students change that belief if they've had it for 10, 15 years or even longer? Do you have any advice for them?
So, first of all, I believe that we all have limiting beliefs about what we can do and we cannot do, but the past does not have to define our future, in the sense that, yes, it did happen. Like maybe you still finding it difficult to speak English, even if you live in the United States or England or any English-speaking country. I do believe, though, that first of all, it doesn't matter where you live, it matters how you live. If you take, for example, two students, one who lives in the United States and let's say a Spanish-speaking student, one lives in the United States, but always hangs around with other Spanish-speaking people, or when they try to learn English, they get into the same old paradigm of, I'm not sure I can actually learn, they stumble upon their words, etc., etc. And then you take another student who does not live in the United States or any other English-speaking country, but then they spend time listening to podcasts or having interesting conversations, maybe on Skype, or even meeting English-speaking natives in a bar around the corner, in a language exchange. So first of all, it's how you live, not where. And if then how you live, what you do in your everyday life, and on top of that, you also live in country, so you live in the UK or the US, that's a great combination. But first of all, you have to learn how to use your time properly. That's the very first thing. The second thing I would say is that, again, the fact that you learned poorly before or inefficiently before does not mean that you have to learn poorly for the rest of your life. There's always, when is the best time to learn better, more efficiently? It's now. Doesn't matter how old you are. Some people say, I'm 40, I'm 50. You have to learn a foreign language when you're in your teens if you want to speak it well. It's not true. I recently heard a story of someone who's learned a foreign language in their 60s and learned a foreign language well within 3 years. And recently at my language learning academy, an 80-year-old girl sent me a message, said, Luca, until I was 80, I could not speak Spanish. And now I speak Spanish fluently in a matter of months. So it's never too old. The third thing is, I believe that the main reason why a lot of people, including people who live in the US or live in the UK or whatever, they do not speak well, comes from a number of factors. The first is the belief that they're not good at language learning or they're not good at learning English. That's the first thing. The second thing is that maybe they don't listen or they don't speak enough. They tend to use the same techniques, or they tend to stick to the same paradigms of what they used to do before, meaning maybe they speak a little bit, but they're a little bit timid, they're a little bit shy, and maybe they don't listen enough, they don't watch movies, they don't get immersed in the language. We can talk about this a little bit more in detail, but there's capital and very important things that people have to change if they want to learn a language well. The good news is that nowadays, with the internet, you can do anything you want if you learn how to use the internet correctly, instead of getting sucked in the rabbit hole of, spending time scrolling the whole day. You can engage in meaningful activities learning English. So these are the three important things that you have to take into account that explain why a lot of people do not speak English well, even if they live in the US.
Well, it's very inspiring that you mentioned that woman who's 80 years old and got amazing results, because I know that, of course, is one of the limiting beliefs students have is, oh, I'm too old. I don't have enough time. You hear these beliefs again and again. Now, speaking of mindset, one of the mindset factors I hear from students a lot is just fear, this fear of making mistakes, this fear of being judged, and it prevents them from actually going out there and using their English in the real world. So they spend all their time studying, acquiring vocabulary, but then they don't have the confidence to actually use it. Have you experienced that with yourself or your students, and what advice would you share?
So let me first tell you that this is a very human thing to be scared of, getting out of your comfort zone. When we get out of our comfort zone, we're always scared. That's the first thing. So it's completely normal to be scared or slightly anxious about the mere fact of having to have a conversation with a native speaker. So that's the first thing to take into account. The second thing to take into account is that I foresee like these three zones. You have the comfort zone at the beginning, right? So that's where you stand, where you're like sitting in the corner, you're learning vocabulary, but you don't want to venture out there and have, talk to people. Then you have there's another layer or zone around that zone, which I call it's called the Goldilocks zone. So it's slightly challenging, but it's not too challenging. I'll give you a concrete example in a second. And then you have the panic zone. The panic zone is where you're completely out of your comfort zone so far that you panic because it's too difficult. An example. So your comfort zone is, let's say, whoever is listening, if you've been learning a language for a little bit and or for a long time for that matter, English, and you still find it difficult, you still tremble at the idea of speaking to someone, or you're interacting with someone, but you don't express yourself smoothly because your mind goes blank and you think, oh my God, they're judging me, I'm making mistakes, you think about grammar, all those things that make it difficult. Then think about this. Your comfort zone is sitting in front of a computer and making maybe lists of words or maybe watching something passively, right? So that is an excuse of, oh, I'm engaging with the language, but I'm not actually talking to people. Then you have what I call the Goldilocks zone. It's a good zone. It's a good zone to be in. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm scared. Fine, normal. But I could hire a tutor, a very nice and friendly person with whom I could have a conversation. It's a protected environment because whether you're paying someone or you find someone you can have a conversation with, maybe on Skype, there is no background noise. That person knows that you're a learner, and then you can have a conversation. You can prepare beforehand about a topic you're interested in, and you can have a meaningful conversation. That's a gray zone that you can get in, a gray zone, but a good zone to be in so that you can actually step out of your comfort zone progressively. Have a conversation. You realize, oh, that was not a big deal. The person was nice. I stumbled and I grumbled a little bit, but at the end of the day, I made it. And then you have the panic zone. The panic zone is where you get out and say you go and buy something. Let's say I don't know, maybe a train ticket. You go to the station and unfortunately you come across a very grumpy old lady or a guy who are not very happy because of their own reasons, and then they blurt out something you do not understand, and you find yourself in that situation where, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I reply that I do not understand and look like a fool, or do I nod and I pretend that I understand? These are not easy situations because we think, oh, you just have to buy a ticket, but in real life conversations and interactions, native speakers are not your teachers. They go about their own business. That's the reason why that's the panic zone. So my simple advice is try to build your comfort zone. If you're scared of speaking, the one thing that you have to think about is to find a situation where you find some comfort, a person who's friendly, not necessarily competent, but friendly. Let me say this again because this is very important. People tend to think that when they have to prepare or just interact with someone, they have to find a very competent person who explains the English grammar in detail. That's not true. You need someone to talk to. That's the main point. That person will listen to you, will possibly give you feedback for the mistakes you make, but they don't have to explain grammar to you in detail. Nowadays, you can do that if you want to, but the main goal is to actually speak, to have a conversation. Fluency is not just a matter of how many words you know, how many grammar rules you know, or whether your pronunciation is good or accurate or not. It's a degree of confidence that you build with experiences that you have. And the first experience you can have, nowadays we can because we have the internet, is to have a conversation with someone that you find friendly in a protected environment. That's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I would do, and that's maybe even more important, is this. The reason why we tend to stumble, we tend to think about grammar, our mind goes blank, is due to something that unfortunately we were all subjected to. Think about, well, you're from the United States, I'm from Italy, but all across the world, the pattern is always the same. At school, we tend to think in terms of performance, not in terms of communication. Children have a great time using foreign languages, learning their own native language, because they communicate, they have fun. They just don't think, oh, I'll be judged. But adults, what happens is that they go to school, they constantly think, I'm getting a mark. Am I going to get a good mark? Am I going to get a bad mark? So someone, I don't know, the teacher addresses you. You're not thinking about, I want to talk about this because I'm so excited. You're thinking, let me try to survive. Let me try to say whatever I can say, but thinking I have to conjugate the verb correctly. I have to say this, that's the problem. And if you start focusing on communication instead of performance, it changes everything. So here's my piece of advice. Whenever you have a conversation, make sure that you prepare something, a topic that you really like, and just talk about that. Get excited. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes or not. The most important thing is you get your point across. If I told you, for example, in English, tomorrow, school, you will understand perfectly. Tomorrow to go to school, you will understand perfectly, even if it's not grammatically accurate, but it's better to say something and make a mistake rather than not saying anything. But this, again, you have to understand and be aware of the fact that the outcome police, it's like, oh, you made a mistake, is there. If you change this, if you have experienced this mind shift, not performance, but communication, it changes everything. One last thing, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I love this. I love this topic. There is a beautiful TED Talk, which is called Teaching English Without Teaching English. I think I wrote it here somewhere. It's by Roberto Guzman. He's a Mexican guy who's teaching Mexican kids to learn to speak English. Beautiful. It talks about all this stuff in his own way, and I think these are universal principles. Focus on communication and not outcome.
You raised so many points. I hope everyone is paying attention because Luca has given you all such amazing advice. And this is something I've seen with my students. They think that when they're communicating with a native speaker, it's the same as communicating with their teacher. They expect to be assessed, judged, corrected. They think it's an appropriate time to think about grammar, correct their mistakes, ask for feedback, when really you're just having a conversation. It's not the appropriate time to do that. So I'm so glad that you raised all those points. And everyone, watch that TED Talk as well. I will watch it myself. I don't believe I have. And you talked specifically about when students forget their words or their mind goes blank, it's because they're entering out of that comfort zone. So it's just more of a natural thing. But I wanted to know if you could expand on that at all or give any more specific advice, because this is one thing that my students ask a lot about. I know the words, I studied this, I know it. But then when I'm in the situation, I open my mouth and it just goes. Do you have any practical strategies to help them remember their words when they need them?
Absolutely. So this happens to me as well. And to go back to your previous question, when you asked me, does this happen to you as well? Did you get scared of speaking? Yes, every single time I learn a new language, I am terrified when the moment comes of speaking, even after all so many years, because in my subconscious mind, unfortunately, the influence that school had on me when I was a little kid is still there in the subconscious part of my mind. So now, to answer your question, we're not going to delve into neuroscience, although I'm really passionate about how the brain works. And if you understand how the brain works, it gives you an incredible insight into why we have these problems when speaking a foreign language, or even our own native language for that matter. But to make it simple, this is the reason why all this works. All this happens, sorry. In our mind, we process language learning when we still do not speak a language well. So we're not talking about our native language, we're talking about foreign language. We use what this part of the brain, which is called prefrontal cortex. This is this is how we think consciously, how we plan things when we try to retrieve words, when we try to think about grammar, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have another part of the brain, which is called the limbic system, that has to do with, let's say, emotions. This is an oversimplification of how this works. But just to show you a metaphor of how, you have two competing, let's say, parts of the brain. One is trying to process, to think about words, to arrange them together, to think about grammar. And the other part, which is the emotional part, fights against this part. So if you're tense, and subconsciously, we walk into a conversation, whether it's with a tutor or with people outside, there's a level of tension that, unfortunately, where the amygdala is involved, and not only the amygdala, that keeps this part of the brain, let's say, keeps it from communicating well with other parts of the brain. So imagine that this part of the brain wants to grab a word somewhere, fetch a word with a mechanical arm, but the other part just keeps it from doing that. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you walk into any conversation with the idea that you're going to be judged and everything, all the negative things that you think concerning a conversation, this is bound to happen. This has happened to me a number of times recently. Just to give you a very concrete example, I've been learning Serbian for 2 years. I had a conversation with my colleague who's Serbian American, and I've been learning the language for 2 years. I understand it pretty well. We recorded a conversation for YouTube. I could not say the simplest things. Like, he asked me, "Are you ready?" I was like, I couldn't even say, "Yes, I am," in Serbian. And I realized, how is that possible? And because the knowledge is there, but it's blocked. So it's something that happens all the time. Our mind goes blank because we are anxious and we are in this mode, in this very negative mode. My suggestion is, once again, what I said before, is that to establish, if you're anxious about having a conversation with a native speaker, find one person, a friendly person, not necessarily competent, a friendly person. You are really excited. You think, oh, I'm going to talk to Jennifer or Luca or Mark about whatever excites you. And when that happens, when you focus more on the communication than the performance, your level of stress is going to go down, and then your mind will go blank, because this is inevitable. It's a background noise that you're not going to eliminate, but it's going to happen less and less when you're talking with that person. If that happens, there's another simple thing you can do, is like, you can just say, I'm trying to say this word. If the other person speaks your Spanish, for example, you can, either say, I don't remember how to say this word, and be very honest, or smile or look at on the fly. But just be honest first with yourself and then with the other person. Once you establish with one person, again, a friendly communication, like a collaboration, then your stress levels will go down, and you will be able to manage this conversation much better. And that is going to give you confidence. With that confidence, you're going to walk into another conversation, and then another conversation. Remember, every time you have another experience in a foreign language, so every time that you walk into a grocery store to ask something, or you buy a train ticket, that's a new experience. It's old because you lived it in your own native language, but it's new because you've never done it in your foreign language. So a little bit of a level, like the level of stress is going to be there. You're going to think, oh my God, I'm just going to mess this up. It's going to be a disaster. Once you do it, you realize no big deal. And then your confidence is going to grow step by step.
Well, you shared a lot there, but I think for my students, just understanding that it's it's how their brain works. It's normal, it's natural. And thank you for sharing that you still have that experience even today. I'm sure that made all my students feel more confident. And it's just building up those successes, getting those successes in a comfortable environment that will allow them to build their confidence slowly over time. Great advice. Thank you. And I feel like we could talk for so long about these topics, especially diving into how our brain works. That's so interesting. And I know you have more videos on your YouTube channel. So why don't you just share with my students where they can find you on YouTube? What's your YouTube channel?
Sure thing. My YouTube channel is just Luca Lampariello, which is just my name. So if you write Luca Lampariello or Luca Languages on YouTube, you will find my channel. It's all about learning how to learn. I do have some videos where I speak multiple languages or other languages in just one video, but mainly it's about how to learn, how to use your brain to learn more efficiently, and to show you that that is possible and everyone can do it.
I'll put the YouTube channel in the description as well, so everyone can follow you, get those language learning tips and advice. Final question for you before we wrap up. If my students were to do only one thing this week to improve their English, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say to focus on the joy of actually whatever they're doing, whether they're speaking, whether we're writing, whether we're reading, whether they're listening, whether they're watching a YouTube video like this one, to have joy, to think about the joy of learning instead of I have to do this because I have to learn. It's more like I want to do this. I think that once again, yes, techniques and strategies, they're important, but this mindset shift that you need to have in order to take things further is one of the most powerful things and factors when it comes to success in learning English or any other language for that matter.
What an amazing way to end our conversation. Focus on joy. You heard it, everyone. Focus on joy. Thank you so much for being here, Luca, and sharing these amazing tips and advice.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.